Hello, everyone. I welcome everybody for another seminar. I'm really honored to host my friend and colleague, Dr. Alpesh Patel. Dr. Patel is the co-director of Northwestern Center for Spine Health. He's also the director of orthopedic spine, as well as the fellowship director of the spinal surgery at the level of orthopedic spine as well. He holds a master's degree in business administration, an MBA from Kellogg School of Management from Northwestern University. He's an extremely talented spine surgeon and also a leader in the field. And today we're pivoting a little bit pertaining to our topic. We always speak about cases and surgical topics tackling different spinal pathologies. Today we'll be speaking about leading high impact spine teams and leadership itself. No better person can speak about that than Dr. Patel. I'm really honored to hosting him tonight or this evening, and the floor is yours, Dr. Patel.
Nader, thank you for the invitation, and thanks for everybody who's listening in. And I appreciate you letting me take us away from the typical case based format, just to talk about something a little bit different. And I think the timing on this is great. You know, as we're moving into, at least in the United States, our summer months, we have some, maybe a little bit more time to reflect on, the past year, the past academic year, at least for us in the academic schedule. And it gives us a chance to reflect and to think about how we want to grow and how we want to be a little bit better at what we do. And I think this topic we're going to talk about today really applies not just to those of us who are in university-based settings or university practices, but really applies universally to all surgeons, doctors that are in healthcare and that are seeing patients. I think we are actively managing people all the time. And unlike the case conversations that we normally talk about week in, week out, these are the things that I don't think I was ever taught when I was a resident. I was never taught these concepts really, during my medical training. And I wasn't exposed to a lot of these in a systematic manner, sort of in a systematic scientific manner until I got my MBA recently. And so I'm happy to share a couple of insights and sort of take some concepts from the business world and then maybe apply it to our world in spine care. The one thing I'll mention, just for everybody who's helping moderate, feel free to cut me off or feel free to stop and have a discussion. I'm hoping that this is more discussion than it is slides, but I will go ahead and get started and try to keep us on time here. So these are my disclosures. There's nothing in here related to the topic at hand. Nothing we're going to be talking about is implant related or pharma related that I'm aware of. Other than I do serve on boards for the CSRS, in their presidential line, and I've been on editorial boards as well. And that's been a lot of my experience outside of my practice as being a leader. And inside my practice, as Nader mentioned, we lead a great team of neuro and ortho spine surgeons working together every day. So this is the beginning, and it's also going to be the end. There's three things that I think you want to take away from this discussion tonight. One is the fundamental importance of investing in yourself as a leader, right? No matter what stage of your career that you're in, whether you're in medical school or all the way through in practice for, like myself, 15 years, I think you're constantly needing to invest in yourself as a leader. And I'm going to show some data and show some evidence that supports why that's important. The second thing, which might be the hardest for a group of surgeons to do, is to accept the importance of others, right? And I'm going to, again, show some data and talk a little bit about why that's so hard for us to accept, but why the sooner you get to that level of acceptance, the better off you'll be and the more impactful you'll be in the care you provide patients. And then the last thing is a bit of a pivot from the concept around me and myself, but thinking about how do I then take those insights and use it to create and lead teams with intent, right? Not just taking the people around me and doing the best I can, but really thinking next level or two levels beyond and thinking about how you strategically create a team and then lead that team, with a clear plan and clear intention. So I'll start a little bit by just talking about asking this question, and maybe ask this question of yourself in your head. What is a healthcare team? And think about the first thing that comes to mind. And what is that first thing that comes to mind? It might look something like an org chart like you'd see from like a hospital, right? Where you have leadership and then kind of branching levels of responsibility, or a reporting structure like this. That's certainly one element of a team within healthcare, maybe more on the administrative side, but maybe something like this applies to your practice as well. I hope it's nothing like this, which is a map of our CMS and or the Secretary of Health and Human Services and all the different factions that lead up into that. I hope it's not this level of complexity. And maybe what I would want to have everyone think about is a little bit more like this, right? The teams of doctors and clinicians, nurses, PAs, et cetera, that we work with day in and day out, whether that be in the operating room, whether that be in the office. And maybe think about that as your framework for teams as we talk more today. So we're thinking about a smallish group of individuals that really have to come together, coordinate, and work together, all with different roles and responsibilities. So this will lead a little bit into one of the first questions. I sent this question out to everybody on Twitter, and we had a really good response right here. So this is the first question, which is, the most important reason that I am successful is, okay? And these were the results that we found so far. And this matches a lot of the common results that I see. So the most important reason that I am successful is my hard work. That's almost always the most common response when I give this survey to a group of physicians. And I've done this across different specialties: orthopedics, neurosurgery, radiology. I've done this in practicing surgeons. I've done these in physicians. It's almost always consistently that my hard work is the reason I'm successful. We have maybe a little more enlightened group of responders when they talk about, the people around me and luck. Very few people ever say it's because of luck, even though a lot of the data would suggest that a lot of the successes that we have are sort of a series of lucky events that maybe line themselves up, right? Being born in the right time, being born at the right place, meeting people maybe spontaneously or randomly throughout our careers. But universally, everybody always says it's my hard work. And this goes along with, I think, the image that many of us have in our heads as physicians, right? This is very much the role model or the ideal that was presented to us as we were in medical school and early in our training, which is of the physician as the superhero, right? The able to do it all, and really the person in charge. And with that, we have the superpowers, and so we reap the rewards of those superpowers. And it's a very me-centric way of looking at healthcare. And I'd be curious if this is just how Americans see healthcare. So I'd love to hear from folks from outside the U.S. But certainly this is a dominant culture, right? And probably the dominant culture in healthcare as far as physicians and certainly our cohort of surgeons is concerned. And I'm going to make an argument that might fly in the face of what many people responded, which is that the hard work that we think is responsible for our success really has nothing to do with your future success. It's important. It's super important. You wouldn't have gotten to where you are as a surgeon or as a physician unless you worked really hard, right? But I'm going to argue that it's actually just table stakes. It's what got you here to your current role. It's not what's going to get you there or take you there to a higher level of impact or a higher level of success. So it's super, super important, not saying it's not, but again, it's table stakes. It's not competitively differentiated. We are all hard workers. It may not feel that way at times when you look around the hospital or if you look around your operating room, but everybody's working hard, right? Everybody's trying to bring their best hard work to the table. That's just not enough anymore. So how do we come to grips with that? Or how did I come to grips with that? And I'll tell you some personal stories as we move along. So I came to understand this a little bit through some of the frameworks I had in my education, but really through some of the failures that I saw, throughout the course of my career. And the failure number one, or the flaw number one that I had, is that I can't scale myself. So I can work really, really hard as an individual, right? And I can pull in longer hours, and I can get really, really hyper efficient in, let's say, in the OR or in the office. and compress what used to take me 3 hours down to an hour and a half, let's say, right? So I can get myself optimized. I can work really hard. I could put in longer and longer and longer hours, but there's only so much time in the day. And the needs, the things that are asked out of us are so immense that you can't scale yourself. It doesn't mean people haven't tried, right? It'd be great to be in 2 places at once. If anybody has some ideas on how to do that, I'd love to see them. Even with all the technology in the world, you can't be in 2 places at once and you can't scale yourself. And so you'll find yourself burning the candle on both ends. You'll find yourself working harder and harder hours. And not surprisingly, you may find yourself getting less and less joy out of the work you do, or feeling more and more stressed by the work you do. So flaw number 1, you can't scale yourself. Flaw number 2 is that despite that vision we have of being the superhero surgeon, we really can't do it all. We can't do all the things that go into, let's say, taking care of a patient by ourselves. And if in an idealized state, if we think about what a patient journey looks like, right? We'll start with symptoms. They come to us, we treat them, we give them a diagnosis and a treatment, and then they recover, right? This is that perfect idealized patient journey. And if this is in your frame of mind, you think, yeah, I can do all of this. I can listen to symptoms, diagnose, treat, and help somebody along their path of recovery. I, as an individual, am able to do this. The reality of it is that healthcare in any context is extraordinarily not just complicated, but complex. And so just for one example, these are some of the initial stages we went through when we looked at telehealth within our practice, thinking about how are we going to make a seamless-ish experience for patients in the telehealth model. And it involved each of these steps, and each of these individuals, our PSCs, our nurses, our schedulers, our MAs, and then the physicians. And we all have our different lanes. We all have different roles to take. And this is just for one office visit, right? So I've got like an 8x5 grid of people and responsibilities for one single telehealth visit. You start to grow that and scale that across more and more patient visits, more and more sites. And you can imagine that we, again, as a physician, can't do all of this. And I think we certainly feel that way at times, that we're asked to do everything. And part of that is that we are, and part of it is that we try to bear the responsibility of doing all of this. And then the third one is that, again, even though we all think very highly of ourselves and we know we do best for our patients, we probably can't deliver the best alone, right? And what does that mean? It's not just about patient surveys, but it's really about understanding what patients want and what they need. And what patients want and need goes across multiple dimensions, right? All it takes is listening to patients for a few times in a row, and you'll understand they all bring something different to the table, just as we as individuals bring something different to the table. And those needs can vary, right? If you look at, this is one of my favorite concepts. This is Maslow's pyramid, to understand sort of the need states that people go through, right? Patients come to us with needs at each of the levels of this pyramid, right? From base level psychological needs of safety, pain relief, all the way up to the top where they need to feel, like they're worthwhile, they have things to contribute to the world, right? And so if you think about all the different needs that people bring and the depths of those needs, there's just no way for you as an individual physician to meet all of these needs all the time, right? I don't think it's possible. And I think you're not going to be as successful as if you were to identify the people around you as being the real big driver of your success, moving forward. So that means if we look past ourselves and we start looking at the people around us as being really, really important to how we deliver the best care we can for our patients, how we have the best impact we can, it means we have to start looking for solutions. And so this is where the orthopedic surgeon in me comes out. I start thinking about sports and sports teams, right? We start thinking about how do highly skilled individual athletes come together to accomplish more as a group than they do as an individual. And so teams in a sporting world is an immediate analogy that many of our heads may go to, right? There are other teams that we're all really, really familiar with, right? Putting a man on the moon didn't happen because of one astronaut, right? There was an immense team and a lot of iterative learning that went through to get that person on the moon. Even though we think about that person, there's thousands of people around them all working really, really well as a coordinated team that got us there, And this team-based concept doesn't just live in sports. It doesn't just live in sort of governmental science or science fiction phenomenon. It lives in the corporate world as well. And so really big successful companies from when I was growing up back in the 80s had these concepts of teams woven in, integrated into how they did business, right? How they worked on projects. And so if you look at these innovators from back in the 80s that were very team focused companies, you have GE, HP, Boeing, massive companies from the 80s. And if you look at nowadays, the big companies that we may think of immediately, the Googles, the Apples, and the Amazons, while they have their issues and their faults, they certainly focus on this team-based approach to innovation, team-based approach to product design and development. And probably no more is as well known as what Google's done. And if you look at their success, a lot of that is based on their team sort of focused culture. So what's the science say, right? And so this is a great study, a great report that was in HBR about 4 to 5 years ago, I believe. And it was done through the MIT Human Dynamics Laboratory. And they went around and they looked, in the corporate world at least, at organizations, firms that were very team focused, right? And they tried to find common factors amongst these teams and common scenarios in which teams outperformed individuals, right? So the common factors of really successful teams were creativity, commitment to each other, to the team, and then this high level of energy. And these three factors all fed off of each other substantially. The environments in which teams outperformed individuals were most often defined by sort of 4 key factors. So interdependent work, so work that depended upon individuals working together, right? Things you couldn't get done alone. A setting of uncertainty, where you need the creativity and the flexibility that a team can bring. Efficiency, where you want to look for ways to, in the corporate world, reduce costs, but in our sense, we might think about ways we reduce time. And then settings of complexity. So interdependent work in a setting of uncertainty, where efficiency is really, really needed, and yet we're faced with complex problems. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that that's healthcare, right? We are interdependent people, patients, providers, physicians working together. We are constantly working in a setting of uncertainty. We are pressured and forced internally and externally to look for maximal efficiency. If you want to create value, you've got to find efficiencies. And we are facing more and more complexity in the care that we provide our patients as the years go by. So these same factors that we see in other industries really are healthcare. And by definition, then teams within healthcare should be more successful, more impactful than individuals working alone. So I'm going to pause and just see if we have a little discussion. We're about 15 minutes or so into the conversation so far, before I go into the next part, which is talking about leadership and how we create teams. But what's some thoughts on what we've talked about so far?
I think, Alpesh, that's excellent. And I mean, I full disclosure, I answered your multiple choice question correctly. Definitely, it's always a team effort in anything we do. It's always a team effort. Like, we all so interdependent on each other, more than we know, on daily basis. Now, what you touched upon teams, and you gave the analogy like sports teams, and as I know, like, there are like weak link sports and strong link sports. What do you think? Where do we stand? Are we a weak link or a strong link? And to explain that, weak link means if there's a weak link within the team will fail. Versus strong link, meaning it doesn't matter all the members of the team, as long as you have 1 or 2 really strong players in the team will win. Basketball is a weak is a strong link sport, versus soccer is a weak link sport. You'd rather have all average players and you'll win a game, versus in a basketball game you need really 1 or 2 superstars. It doesn't matter the rest of the team. You can have really mediocre players, but 1 or 2 good, LeBron James, Michael Jordans, and you'll win a game. Where do you think, in terms of teams, spine teams, or high efficiency healthcare teams? Is it a weak link sport or a strong link sport?
I think that's a great question. I would say I think we act like we're a strong link sport, and again, we as the physicians often try to be that role of the strong link, right? And we try to be the glue that holds everything together, and we constantly put effort into that. I mean, constantly put effort into it. So I think we act like a strong link sport, but we are probably a weak link sport, right? And again, I think part of my thinking on this is to look around at the people around me and to constantly build them up and to constantly get them to be as strong as they can be. Bringing unique skills to the table, right? Bringing unique talents and skills to the table, but constantly get them to be as strong as they can be, because I think that in the end helps our patients.
I can't agree more with that, Alpesh.
And I think for many of us, we face some, real big challenges between in the academic world, we have this turnover, right, of residents and fellows, and we're kind of going through it soon now. And so, that's an opportunity when people aren't sort of officially or explicitly brought onto the team, right? We see some potential for weak links, and then some chaos, right, in that transition. Alternatively, when we see our nursing staff, and at least in Chicago, there's a lot of labor issues in healthcare right now, right? And we can see where you can have phenomenal surgeons, great anesthesiologists, great radiologists, but if our nursing care on the floor isn't at the level we want it to be at, we see less than optimal results, right? So I think it's a weak link.
In the study, the chat room, Dr. Burchak is saying, as physicians, we are surrounded by many individuals with very different levels of ability and motivation. It would seem that the biggest challenge is to get everyone on the team to buy into the goal, and that's not easy.
Yep.
Makes me think about the book, Good to Great.
Well, he's stealing my thunder a little bit. I'm going to get to that in just a couple minutes, but absolutely, right? It's how do you then lead and create these teams? So maybe I'll go for another like 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll pause again and talk through again here. But absolutely, right? The biggest challenge then is understanding how to take all the people that are around us and get them to work together as best as possible, right? And again, these are concepts that have been tested out in other environments, right? And again, I'm going to rely on a lot of corporate examples, but certainly there's a lot of other examples in athletics that these are tried and tested concepts. I don't know if we've ever actually explicitly done it in healthcare. Like we've done it by de facto, or you've done it as, sort of part of what you may have seen during your training, but never again with intent. So let me keep going here just a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit about leadership. A leadership discussion is something that you could have a full day seminar on what it means, what leadership means. So I'm going to be super brief, and yet I also want to be controversial, so it keeps it interesting, right? So when it comes to leadership, there's this question that's out there, and we ask ourselves this of ourselves. We ask this of our partners. Are leaders born? Are you a born leader, right? Or are leaders made? Are leaders made by the environment, made by their learning, made by their education? So is leadership a natural talent, right? Or is it a learned practice skill? So this was the question that we asked again to everyone. And it was 50-50 for a while. And then the learned skill really came in at the end and took it over. And so again, this breakdown of concept of natural talent versus learned skill, this is, again, the most common response I see when I present this survey to physicians, regardless of subspecialty, right? And it's almost always right around this number. It's about 2/3 learned skill, about 1/3 natural talent. And I think that question of natural talent versus learned skill is an important one. Okay, it is an important one. And my personal take on this is that many of us may think about this as being an inborn or natural talent, and we may be not thinking about all the experiences you had as a child, right? All the educational and real world experiences you had, right? The environment you grew up in, the environment you were raised in, maybe that first environment of your practice, that crucible of the fire of your of your practice. And we tend to, over time, put those in the back of our mind. And again, it sings to that, or it speaks to that story of ego and of individual greatness to say, well, I think I was born this way. I'm unique. This can't be learned, right? And I think, again, the data and the evidence would suggest otherwise. Now, there are some really charismatic people. There are some really, really extroverted people. There are folks who know how to be magnets of attention, right? We see this in politics a lot, right? We see this in other avenues where people there's a draw to them. It's, again, charisma, for lack of a better word. I would argue that that's also probably a learned skill, right? That iteratively over time, people have figured out what other people around them respond to favorably and have continued to iterate and hone on that set of skills, right? The other way, and I found this on a blog site, and I forgot to put the reference down, so my apologies. But let's say you fundamentally think, nope, there is a spread in leadership talent, whether that's natural, you're born with it, whether that's your upbringing, your development, your educational experience. There is this spread in leadership talent. That I will totally agree with. And let's assume it follows some kind of a Gaussian type curve or a bell-shaped curve, right? And you've got individual A on the right, who's maybe a better leader than individual B, okay? If this is just what it is and there's no way to improve, it's a little bit depressing for at least half the people on this curve, right? And it also would suggest that over time and with intent and with experience, we don't get better at doing the things we do. And I think common sense speaks strongly against that, right? We are better surgeons 5-10 years in than we were when we started. And just like that, and surgical training, I think with appropriate leadership training, you can actually shift this curve, right? Pretty substantially to where that maybe less than average leader in B can now, with leadership training, move and be substantially better than that leader A who never invested in themselves, right? So there'll always be a spread, but I think there's an opportunity with insight and with time and with effort to invest in yourself as a leader and move yourself along this curve to be the best leader you can be. Whether that's the whole curve shifting or you moving along a curve, probably a little pedantic to go too much into that, but the idea is here that training does work and that leadership training is super important. And it's something, again, that I don't think we do enough of in spine care in a structured manner. So as we go into summer, I want to share one book that's been super influential to me. It's written by one of the professors at Kellogg that I learned from. His name's Harry Kramer, and he used to be the CEO of Baxter. And he's written a number of books on leadership that are just super influential. But he identifies certain traits of really successful leaders, and he obviously includes himself, but others who have been high impact. And this idea of these traits are not things, again, that you're just born with. These are actionable traits that you have to constantly work at, and as you're training to be a better leader. And so he talks about being self-reflective. So honestly, having discussions like this, right? Spending an hour of what we normally would have been talking about, maybe metastatic tumors or about fractures, right? Or about disc arthroplasty or about something else technical, spending a time like this and mentally going through the exercise of reflecting on what it means to be a leader and what skills do I need and how do I grow those skills. Self-reflection, super important. Balance, we're not so good at this as surgeons, people, right? Like we need balance in our lives, balance between work and home, balance within work, balance at home, finding balance in your life that prioritizes the things you care about, really important. Self-confidence, this is one that we're usually not lacking in, right, as surgeons, but not about ego. It's not being egocentric. It's being confident in knowing what you know and equally confident in knowing what you don't know and seeking help and listening to people around you, right? That takes a lot of self-confidence to sit in a room and let other people speak and to learn from the people around you and not always have to give an answer or give the right answer. And that took me 10 years of practice to figure out, right? It took me 10 years of practice that you're going to learn more and get better ideas the less you talk sometimes. And then the last one is this idea of humility, and it sort of feeds this circle of shared traits where you're humble. You're not genuflecting, and you're not always deferential, but you're humble, again, to this concept of what I know and what I don't know, and who I rely upon, and that idea of humility combined with self-reflection, balance, self-confidence. These are common traits that a lot of really high impact leaders have. Not everyone has all four, and some of our leaders may have none of these, right? But I think the really important ones, really impactful ones have this. So that's trait. And then understanding a little bit about leadership style. There's different styles of leadership, and you'll hear these concepts about like a servant leader. Abraham Lincoln, one of our presidents, is oftentimes put in that role where he played, the servant leader for the United States during a really tumultuous time, leading up to and through our Civil War. Then you've got inspirational or aspirational leaders, right? Like Martin Luther King. These individuals, the style that they presented to us during their time was that they were consistently true to who they are, right? So they have certain sets of values, like we all have certain sets of values, and you stay true to those values despite the situation, despite the adversity, despite the environment that you're in. But, and this is a picture, anybody know who this is?
Machiavelli.
Oh, Nodder, you're too smart, too smart. So this is Machiavelli, right? Which is the concept of a strategic leader. And so that's a leader who fits in with the where and the when you find yourself, right? And so you've got these polar opposites of saying, well, I'm going to be an idealist, or I'm going to be, be 100% committed to just doing what I think the right thing is all the time. And you've got this other line, which is to say, well, you really need to fit in where and when where you find yourself. You have to be strategic about how you position yourself as a leader, or you'll never get anything accomplished. And the honest answer is it's both, right? In my mind, at least. And in my opinion, I think you need to be true to who you are, consistently true, and display that consistency to the people around you to start to build that culture of a team. But you also need to be savvy enough and aware enough to understand what's going on, right, in the micro or macro environment around you for you to have any hope of being successful, right? So these are the concepts around style and traits, and I'll leave it at that without delving too much more into it, because there's a lot of concepts in leadership around hard power or soft power. But maybe I'll pause real quick if we want to talk for a couple of minutes about leadership.
So, Dr. Patel, and I know Alex, he wanted to say something, so I'm going to also open the floor for you to speak, Alex. So, Alpesh, so you think, to me, like questions of nature versus nurture, it's usually the answer is combination of both, right? Like you have the genetic predisposition, or whatever that means, that you can certainly nurture with your experiences and your environment. But when I look at these individuals, it seems to me 90% nature, 10% nurture. I mean, I'm not sure, like for sure they're educational, like all well educated. There's no like one common factor, they're very well educated, all three individuals. I think a lot of it boils down to, you spoke about traits, and a lot of it is also, traits, EQ, self-awareness, yep, self-regulation, empathy. I mean, how do you learn empathy? I for sure, like you can improve your EQ by reading philosophy and going to courses, but a lot of these traits are innate. I mean, I
think this is the debate, right? Are they really innate, or are these are they learned skills? I tend to go on the learned skill side of things, because yeah, how do you teach empathy? I can't sit down and tell you how to be empathetic, right? What you can hope is that through experiential learning, that you've seen situations where empathy is delivered, and you see where it's not delivered, you see the outcomes, and then you choose which one you'd like more. I don't think we have a definitive answer, by the way. Like
we have the answer, yeah.
You can live in either side that you want, but I still believe that if we consistently give good examples, like again, for all of us who are training fellows, who are training residents, who are training students, right? If we consider them as either they have it or they don't have it, whether it is empathy, EQ, IQ, et cetera, what do we then bring to the table as educators, right?
Correct, yeah, but the thing is, like, at the end of the day, Alpesh, like leadership, it's not a virtue, right? Like, it's not like like one of the 10 commandments, be a leader. Like, it's not like virtue, saying the truth, not lying. That's a virtue, and that is an absolute. Like, I think no one disagrees on that. Like, doing the right thing. Leadership, it's not a virtue. I mean, it's not something that if you're not a leader, you are not a good person, right? Like, so that's some people conflate that. Like, everyone wants to be a leader. I don't think it's super necessary that each human being should be a leader or has to be. But every human being should not lie, should not steal, should not just stick to the doing good. So that's another component. That's why having those basic characteristics and EQ that you can then hone with I mean, you are first yourself, you're really a high achiever, you went to pursued an MBA, but I believe that you are a natural leader who wants to even get better through education and knowledge and skill, going from good to great, right? Like that's but if there's no natural drive and to do something, then it starts somewhere, and then the environment around you would help you out with that. Alex, you want to say something?
We can have a really circular conversation about this, all right? Because I would argue that what creates drive. Is it something you're born with, or is drive what you see around you, right? And you want to mimic or emulate the people around you. So, but like I said, I think Alex wanted to say something, and then I'll make sure we keep going to wrap up on time.
Yeah, it's a really very interesting and very important topic. It's a great discussion, great session. It's leadership. Everybody who has a certain position in a hospital has got the term he's a leader, but maybe he isn't. And I appreciate your comment that leadership can be learned, but we are put into positions, and first we are a boss. And I can be a bossy boss, I can be a leader as a boss, I can be a teacher, I can be a leader. We are all physicians. We all went to med school, and to our education is different, but in the end it's similar. When have you got your first leadership course? When did somebody tell you, Alpesh, come on, go to this course and learn something about leadership? Or have you thought by yourself, well, maybe I should invest some time into this topic to how to become a leader? This is my question.
A great question, Alex, and I'll share some details on that. So if you had asked me that question early in my career, I would have said, yes, I'm a leader. I don't need to go to a course on how to do it. I just know how to do it. And so I may have gotten advice to go to leadership courses very early on in my career, Alex, but I don't think I listened. I think I just said, yeah, I know how to do this. I'm good. And what spurred me on to sit back and reflect a little bit and look for more knowledge and more information on this and start to think about leadership systematically were the challenges that I saw and faced in my career, right? Having challenges of trying to rein in a team of nurses and, let's say, PAs or nurse practitioners, students, residents, fellows, all bring to the table different skills, all, by the way, having different sets of goals and incentives and motives, right? And trying to constantly think about how I'm going to get these people to work together. And going through trial and error and trial and error and error and error is what forced me to sit back and say, I think I need to look at this a little bit differently. And so hopefully I can shortcut some of that errors for some of the people listening. You don't have to go through as many of the ups and downs that at least I had to go through.
Yeah, for me it was I was put in the position head of spine surgery, and so the first measurements have been just caseload. How much is your growth? Is this 5%, 10%? And then when the growth was there and the team was expanding, suddenly I noticed, oh, I'm responsible. I'm not responsible for the cases. I'm responsible for my team, for my attendings. Now, 5 lives and they want to develop, and they want to be better. They want to be making steps forward. They want to have new insights, new topics, and suddenly I recognized I'm responsible for not for the career, but their lives, whether they are happy or whether they are unlucky, and I have the chance to regulate this. I can make people very happy with my words, with my actions, and I can really make them feel bad. And I'm a human being, and sometimes I do things I regret. I have to apologize, and this is now back to the childhood. To be able to apologize, I think it's really hard to learn this later. If you're 40 or like me, 48 years old, it's hard to learn these things. And it's a mix. And when your Twitter question, it's a natural talent or is it a learned skill? Maybe it's a hidden talent. You didn't know that this talent is inside you, and the learning process reveals and liberates these talents. It's really, really hard. It's so interesting. And the older I get, the more time I invest in all these books and podcasts and stuff. It's so important today. I really
your point is taken on. And I think a couple things that I heard there that really stand out is that it's when you have this concept, again, you can get a title, right? You can be told you are the leader of this group. That doesn't mean that you're the leader. I think we all know that titles don't really define leaders, right? And so it's more when you decided right then and there to say, I take on and I bear the responsibility of the people that work for me, or the people that report to me, right? That bearing of responsibility of their well-being is one of those things Nader pointed out earlier. It's that sense of empathy, right? And that's unbelievably important because it reframes exactly how you interface and how you interact. The last bit of the talk here is going to be talking a little bit about culture, right? And how do you build the culture of a team? And that starts with understanding and knowing who your team is, right? And then the other thing you'd said that's really important that I don't want to forget to talk about is that idea of having to apologize. It's a little deviation from where we are right now in the discussion, but having to apologize. We all hate apologizing. We think it's a sign of weakness. And the automatic assumption that I think every human being has is that if I admit that I'm wrong, it's a sign of weakness and the people around me will respect me less. And again, the best data, the best evidence we have, whether it be from the business world or from psychology, would actually suggest the opposite, right? That amongst a team of individuals who knows each other, or at least is aware of each other and has some common links, admitting your mistakes actually creates more trust and more respect from the people around you, right? So being very candid, honest, transparent, I made a mistake, or saying, hey, I'm sorry, I kind of acted out a little bit yesterday. I was just really tired and frustrated. I hope you understand that it wasn't intentional and I'm ready to move on. Diagnosing the problem, identifying the mistake you made, and finding a reparative solution for that mistake, unbelievably powerful in building your team and creating, trust and respect within a team. So I think learning how to apologize is super hard. It's an unbelievably important skill. Unbelievably important skill. All right, that was our pause. Ali,
this
go.
is Ali. I know you have a few more slides. I apologize, but I just want to sneak in this quick question. Thank you very much for all the valuable information up to this point. So you mentioned Machiavelli. I thought you were going to also invoke the whole concept of is it better to be feared than loved if you can't do both? In healthcare, you talked about the different types of leadership styles. From your knowledge of obviously being a surgeon, but also having a good grasp of the business world, in healthcare, do you think one applies more than the other? Do you think it's prudent to, I don't want to, we all have kind of leaders and chairmen and chairwomen who adopt a certain leadership style, one over the other, and honestly, they could be opposite, but both successful. But I want to know what your opinion is as far as leadership in healthcare and the whole concept of Is it better to be feared than loved, or loved than feared, or a balance between the two?
Oh, totally. Yeah, that's a great question, Ali. And what I would say is, I think where we once were in healthcare is that you could be unbelievably successful as a leader through fear. And you didn't need people to love you, that if they feared you, then you would have them, they would be successful, and you'd get them to do the work that you wanted them to do, right? And I think that was a very traditional model, at least in a lot of orthopedic departments around the country, right? It was very much a fear-driven model. If I look at where we are in 2022, that is by far and away the outlier, right? Much more often than not, chair people of departments are looking at, or maybe they're chosen for, leadership styles that are in the opposite realm, which is not so much to be loved, but to lead with empathy, to look at your faculty members maybe with a 360 lens, as opposed to just, what can I get out of them? So I think in current state, you're probably going to be a much more successful leader across large hospital systems, large health systems, many corporations, and certainly in many academic centers, to be a leader with empathy, as opposed to a leader who leads with fear.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I just want to make sure Dr. Dadale heard that and is going to, listen to you on that one.
I don't know. I'm scared of Nader sometimes. So his fear might work for him at times. No, he is such an empathetic individual. I can't even stress it. I'm so proud to have him as a partner.
Thank you so much, Alpesh. Appreciate it.
Although that's the first time he's ever called me by my first name. He always calls me Dr. Patel, which makes me feel very, very uneasy. All right. I want to respect the time, and there's a lot of concepts still to talk about here. So let me just talk, maybe what I'll try to wrap up on is thinking about sort of 3 key elements for team design. This came up earlier in one of the chat questions about, okay, so I've accepted that I need people around me. I've accepted my role implicitly or explicitly is going to be a leader. Now, how do I work with the people around me? How do I choose to hire or retain certain people? How do I give them a common purpose? And then how do I create a culture that supports that? This is that book, Good to Great. If you haven't read it, it should be on your summer reading list. It is a little dated in the examples that it gives, but it absolutely, the concepts and the framework still hold true. And one of the main concepts out of this book for successful or great companies is to find the right people, right? So the analogy he gives is getting the right people on the bus. If your team is the bus and you're heading in a direction, you want to get the right people on the bus. So that means spending time and looking for the right people to have around you. Now, sometimes we don't always get to pick, right? Many times you're sort of placed in an environment and you're given the people that you have, but your job as a leader is to start to sort them out and identify what role do they play within your team, and are they right size, right fit for the team that you envision? Should they have a different role, right? Not so much leaving your team, but should you reprioritize or shift what they do a little bit? And so to do that, the best evidence would suggest that the key element of building a team to get the most out of them is to build a super diverse team, okay? And when we think about diversity, we oftentimes think about sort of rather, social or very surface-based factors that drive diversity, right? Things that you can see when you look at someone. And I think if you really want to have a high impact, you have to dive deep, right? You have to dive deep to look for diversity and move beyond just these social categories that are really easy to measure. They check boxes, all those kinds of things. And look for informational diversity. So find people on your team who bring different sets of information, different backgrounds, different insights. And then you're going to get a much smarter team than you will if everyone on your team, let's say, fine, looks the same, but if everybody on your team thinks exactly the same, you end up in this bucket of groupthink, right? You end up in an echo chamber. Everybody tells each other how great they are, and you miss all the opportunities around you. And the place you want to be careful about is looking for so much diversity that people start to differ on values. You have to have a common set of values as you build your team, even if information and backgrounds are very different. If your values are fundamentally different, you're going to get a lot of destructive conflict. And so on that concept around values is always asking yourself when you're faced with a team and explicitly sort of asking, what is your purpose? What's the goal? Alex, you talked about when you started, it was about, surgical volume, right? What's the numbers? Very numerical. Many of us see those as goals, right? That we're given, tasks that we're given. But go deeper and really ask yourself, what's the purpose? What's the common thing that's binding all of our people together? My nurse doesn't care if I do more cases or less cases, right? My MA doesn't care if I generate more RVUs or less RVUs or collections or whatever metric you want to use that's a financial collection. What we all care about is taking care of patients, right? I mean, that's in healthcare, we should have this very fundamental common purpose. And there's one quick analogy I'll give, which is, and I think it goes back to the rebuilding of London after the Great Fire there. And there's a story about an architect identifying or coming across 3 different stonemasons or bricklayers, depending on which story you read. And he asked the 3 bricklayers or stonemasons, what are you doing? They were chiseling away, working on rocks. And the first stonemason talks about how he's there because it's his job and he's there to feed his family. The second stonemason talks about how he's there to build a wall, right? And then the third stonemason, who ends up being the leader of the group, right? And who ends up being the one that really drives a group towards success, says, I'm building a cathedral. I'm not building a wall, I'm building a cathedral. And so that framework around purpose is a really, really important take-home point. If we focus on the RVUs, the surgical cases, right, we'll be very transactional in our relationship with each other, right? You'll identify this very functional purpose, but you're not going to inspire people to be the best that they can be around you. Whereas if you're building the cathedral, if you're thinking about, I'm here to save patients, or I'm here to help make patients' lives better, that is such a unifying concept for people who choose to go into healthcare. It's something that we take for granted and we don't explicitly say it, and that's a lost opportunity. And I would argue if you just spend some time in the next week or so, if you talk with your team at work and you have this discussion, which will feel a little weird if you haven't had it before, but have it. And you just say, hey, listen, what's our purpose here? What is the one thing that we all agreed that we want to work on together? And you're going to find that patient care and making the lives of patients and their families better is this strong common purpose that we all share. We just don't talk about it often enough, and it gets lost in the shuffle. So the last bit here is on how do you get a team to perform, which comes down to a discussion really around culture. So what drives engagement and what drives execution? So you've done all this planning, and there's certain behaviors within a team that help that team stand out compared to others. Okay. Trust, conflict. Interestingly enough, conflict is a healthy behavior. If it's healthy conflict, right? Creative conflict or creative friction versus destructive conflict. Commitment to the purpose we talked about earlier, but to each other. So really having individuals in your team commit and get to know each other, right? Accountability to each other, that you're accountable to your team as a leader, just as they're accountable to you. And then the sharing of results, right? Seeing your results, celebrating results, and working towards better results. These are 5 behaviors that they may be intuitive to you as you listen to me talk about this, but if you can take them from intuitive to explicit in how you engage and interface with your team, I think you'll see really, really good culture creation. You'll have these strong bonds between your team members that'll really make the execution of your goals, the execution of your purpose much more successful. The opposite's also really true, is that leaders can create really great, or solve for problems, create wonderful environments. Leaders can also propagate or even amplify problems if they don't address these common issues, trust issues, dysfunctional environment, selfishness. This was one of the football coaches in America talking about the Michigan football team and how terrible they were a couple of years ago. And this was his dissection of what was the problem they were likely facing, on the inside. And then there are tactics that you can do as a leader that create this culture, right? Having the right team size matters. If you have too many people on a team, it's not a team anymore, right? It turns into a committee. Having trust and safety, knowing each other, like really personally knowing the people around you, being accountable, finding ways of getting productive conflict, into your discussions on a regular basis. Netflix, they've got some problems right now, but they have a really interesting internal culture. And if you look it up online, you'll find this deck that's out there that talks about Netflix's culture. But the key part here is they're very explicit about their rules of engagement. Like they define to everybody who joins Netflix, this is what we expect out of you. It's clear, it's consistent, it's accountable, there's active feedback and improvement, right? And I'd ask yourselves in your practice or in your departments or in your hospital, when you bring somebody new into the team, how often do you have a very explicitly stated conversation about what's expected from them with clear, consistent language, how accountability works, and how you give active feedback and improvement? I know I never even had this concept of being explicit with this information until I dug deep into it. And the real world example of this is from Nader and our team at Northwestern. We have a team charter. We sat down as a group of surgeons a couple of years ago. I think this might have been during COVID when we had some time on our hands, but we sat down and we explicitly stated what's our purpose, what are our responsibilities to each other. And that was around education, research, clinical work. What are our norms and ground rules? How are we going to interface with each other? If I irritate Nader one day, how are we going to come to resolution on that, right? So that it's constructive conflict and not destructive conflict. And we signed this all, like putting everybody's signature to it, digital or real. It has a level of commitment. Since this time, we onboarded 3 more surgeons. 3 more surgeons joined our practice, and all 3 of them were taken through this charter as well. And all 3 of them have signed this charter. And as we bring new people on board, they're going to have this explicit set of rules of who we are, what we do, why we do what we do, and how we engage with each other. And this is an exercise that's well worth it. I think it, and Nader, you share your perspective on it, but I feel like this gives us a common set of a common playbook, if you will, for us to work off of constantly. So I'm going to summarize and wrap up. Remember those 3 things we talked about at the beginning. So first is accept your need of others. Second is invest in yourself as a leader. And I'm going to say, do it now. And then third is start to think about how you can create and lead the teams you have around you with intent. Think about really key tactics that you can bring into your practice or into your teams, next week. And to start to gradually chip away and create a better working culture, for you, for your teammates, but then ultimately, obviously, for the patients that we take care of. So I'll stop there, and we got a couple of minutes left. More open discussion.
A beautiful seminar, Alpesh, and I wish I had another hour. You know what I mean? We can keep going, and such a super relevant topic. So I let's open it up. I don't want to be the only person who speaks. Alex, do you have any other comments, or I don't know if Michael Galgano is with us or through the chat?
Alpesh, really great session. I wanted to ask you, do you think that leadership is learned completely different in the US American society compared to European societies? The industry is pretty different, and yep. You mentioned only US American companies like Netflix and Amazon. What do you think about your impressions from European colleagues when you talk about leadership?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And I'll talk about Europe, and we can even include some of my colleagues I've had lots of conversations with from either Japan or Korea, and it is very different. Each, and even within Europe, each country has its nuances, right? About what's socially acceptable, what's not socially acceptable. Is hierarchy still very much structured upward, or is it relatively flat, right? And I think the answer to that is going to be different in England than it is going to be in Germany, right? And it's going to be very different in America as it is in Japan or in South Korea. And so there are very, very different cultural concepts of what a good leader is. And similarly, I did stick with mostly American companies because that's, again, what I know. But if I look at the corporate culture of like high performing European companies versus US companies, I think there are some elements that are very different, but I think certain things still hold true, right? So companies or leaders that are thinking about the people around them with empathy, with reflection, with a plan, with a good culture, are going to consistently outperform, right, those that aren't. I think that and maybe again, the thought is that, you know, the story that we tell ourselves is that a lot of American companies are sort of individually led and founded, right? One person in a garage created this company out of nothing. That's, again, the story we tell ourselves. And that builds that myth of the leader in that realm. The reality of it is that that's the outlier, right? That's really the outlier. Unfortunately, it's the one that garners the most publicity, and it's the one that's top of mind when you start thinking about leaders. But I'd be curious, Alex, what do you think? What in your experience, right? These concepts we talked about being egocentric and I'm the surgeon, I'm in charge. Does that fly?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. You know, this is 70th platinum anniversary of the Queen's reign, 70 years. And we have a little bit, not royals, but we have got the family businesses led by one single person who was the founder, or he was the son of the founder, second, third generation. And these companies are really family, traditional companies. And this is a hierarchy you have never seen, because he's a patron, like a king. He's the godfather, and what he decides is done. And if he does wise decisions, the company is really good. So there's an age, and the world is proceeding, and many of these companies fail, and the switch from one generation to the other generation is very, very dangerous. Many companies don't manage and go into bankruptcy or were sold. I think leadership is really we really learn a lot from the US American companies, because I think they are a little bit with their kind of leadership and structure, they are really good to look at and learn from them. And we should leave some European old-fashioned hierarchies, especially in medicine, especially in surgery, where the chief, the head of department really has problems to accept wise decisions of attendings, because he's up there and the attending is down there.
Yeah.
Great point, Alex. Alpesh, so you know, I know we're going over a little bit, but it's worth it. You spoke about, you know, having a purpose so that your team as a whole has the same purpose, and that's fantastic. You know, it's like, you know, the surgeons focus on RVUs, but why would the MA care? Why would the nurse care? Should all have the same purpose of doing good to patients. But you know, you're leading a team, right? Like, you're leading a team, but you have a boss too, right? And there's a conflict there, because what if your purpose as a team is not valued? What if the ultimate value that you bring in are just measured by RVUs? How do you balance that? Like, you're leading your own team,
yep,
and your purpose is to do good to patients, but your boss, like, you know, everyone has a boss, it values RVUs the most. I mean, that's just an example, right? Like, yeah. But I think,
and I think that might be because your boss is held to that number and that number alone, right? So they have to make you care about it. Listen, there's always going to be an operational metric, right, or a key performance indicator that you're going to have to match to or work towards or follow, right? In any management structure, you need that. Without it, you don't know if you're succeeding or not succeeding from a financial standpoint. So you got to have that. My point in saying purpose is to understand that if that's the only common thread that you have, the only common thread you have is that economic or financial output, RVU, caseload, you name it, collections. That's very thin ice to be walking on. Very, very thin ice to be walking on. And I would believe that in the long run, teams that have more in common than just that, teams that are based around common purposes, are going to provide better patient care and are going to get that financial metric that you're looking for more reliably, more predictably, than teams that aren't thinking about that bigger picture.
Yes. So
Right.
low time preference, like you're investing in the future. You don't want to see the dividends now. You want to create a strong theme and purpose so that in the long run, will pay dividends, and it's more sustained, and it's just low time preference. Like, you're not going to see the dividends now. On the long run, it's going to pay more dividend overall.
Correct. Yeah, like any investment, right? Like any investment, you expect a long-term return. But what it also is, patients will get better care. And we know word of mouth matters. And
Correct.
You'll get more patients if you're providing care in a more organized, more consistent manner than your competition. Two is, you're going to have hopefully a lot less turnover in your staff. Again, having nurses leave, MAs leave, PAs, nurse practitioners leave, having to go out, hire, recruit, retrain. That's a lot of cost. That's a lot of inefficiency, right? And so the better your team is, the more retention you're going to have as well. So thinking about that as another operational metric, right? So so one answer is, yes, you have to go with the KPIs that people care about. The other one is, can you define some other values, some other numbers, let's say, or indicators that are a reflection of how good your team is together, that also have an economic effect? So turnover rate would be one that I would argue for, right? How many people do you lose every year in your practice or in your organization? If that number is really low, right, that's an economically important number that you need to track and share. And
Absolutely.
use it as proof that what you're doing is really valuable. Right?
Absolutely. If you lose even a nurse or a physician, for instance, who's been here for 10 years, who built the practice, and then you hire somebody else, that's going to take another 5-10 years to get that person to where that other person was. That's a huge opportunity. That's a huge loss. And it's multiplicative.
And I think these concepts that have traditionally lived in maybe more of a business world, right? That we don't want to maybe pull into our day-to-day care of patients are still super important. Even if you don't want to be managed like that, you're going to still end up being managed in that way in some respect, right? You're going to have somebody that you have to answer to at some point that's going to expect these economic outputs from you.
Fantastic. Well, can't thank you enough, Dr. Patel, for joining us today. You're going to come back soon. There are many more topics you want to host you.
Happy
and we wanted
to
discuss.
listen. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm happy next time if you guys want to do a more traditional case conference, I can bring in some cases. But as I go further into my career, these are the things I find myself having more fun talking about.
Likewise. And again, I can't thank you enough, Alpesh. And for everybody else, next seminar will be hosted by Dr. John Shen. The invited speaker is a surprise. We will learn about the invited speaker the next few days. Thanks everyone for joining us, and have a good night.
All right.